and welcome to the second live session of the NPTEL MOOC course on economics of health and education. In the last one month, in the last 4 weeks, I believe learners are busy with learning the the lessons from week 5 to week 9. So in week 9 of this course, week 5 of this course, we have discussed about education. Prior to that, in the first 4 weeks of this course, we focused attention on the demand for health, the microeconomic foundations of how we understand health in economics. And we discussed about demand for health and healthcare. We discussed the Grossman's production function and the Grossman's equation for health. We also studied about demand for health insurance and adverse selection and moral hazard. And we also, in one of the lessons of week 4, we focused on the supply of health. Now, in the week starting week 5, we shifted attention to demand for education. And in the lesson on demand for education, I began with a general lecture about why children learn very little despite being in schools. And it was based on a very important paper by Max Roser about how can the world provide a better education to the next generation. So in this lesson, we sort of laid the foundation as to how, despite the fact that enrollments have increased over the period of last many years, we do not see commensurate increases in terms of learning quality and so on. And we identified 3 important reasons as to why this may have been the case. And we focused on avoiding overly ambitious curriculum and teaching at the right level, improved pedagogy and lesson plans, and providing information on returns to education as some of the important practical reasons as to why we do not see the translation of being in education or being in schools, and why we do not see that translating into quality of education. And as we continued in week 5 of this course, we focused on a basic model of human capital investment. We also discussed a few influential thinkers like Jacob Mincer and Theodore Schultz and Gary Becker in the context of human capital. And then in the final lesson of week 5, we focused on production of education and returns of education, or returns to education. And in this lesson on production of education and returns to education, we also based it on global data, where we tried to understand what are the inputs and the outputs and the processes that go into the production function. And we looked at a very basic education production function, where the dependent variable was the skills learned or the achievements of schooling, and the independent variables consisted of years of schooling, the vector of school and teacher characteristics, vector of child characteristics, a vector of household characteristics, and also the school inputs under the control of household, such as children's daily attendance, effort in school and doing homework, and so on. And while we studied this, we also tried to understand what do we mean when we say there's a demand for education, what are the determinants of private demand for education and social demand for education. And then we discussed that education is a valuable investment both individually and collectively, and that the most common way to measure the private returns to education is to study how attainment improves individual labor market outcomes. And then we saw how, with regard to social returns, the most common approach is to measure the effect of education on various pro-social behaviors such as volunteering or political participation, and its importance and its relationship to economic growth, and so on. And then we also looked at some of the comparisons and implications of private returns to education and social returns to education. As we moved to week 6, we focused on budgetary policy and public good. We discussed very briefly the concept of a public good, and we drew comparisons with respect to how to identify the characteristics of a public good vis-a-vis private goods. And we also introduced the concept of the merit good. We discussed the issue of externalities and correction of externalities in that context. And after giving you the premise on public goods, private goods, and merit goods, we had a discussion on week 6 on the question of whether higher education is a public good, a quasi public good, or a merit good. And in discussing the role of higher education or the importance of higher education in public good classification, we tried to see what are the important discussions surrounding the question of higher education. What is its social value? What does it have to do with returns to education in terms of intergenerational improvement of status and so on and so forth. And then in week 7, we discussed about a new topic on inequalities of outcomes and opportunities. And as a part of discussing inequalities of outcomes and opportunities, I introduced to you two important scholars whose works have been elaborately discussed in the context of education, health, and labor markets. We started with the idea, with Amartya Sen's ideas on equality, and particularly giving reference with reference to his book on inequality re-examined. And we in that context we spoke about different kinds of diversities that the book talks of. And then we also discussed about focal variable choice of spaces, and then we tried to understand with regard to diversities. We tried to see the how equal opportunities can often lead to very unequal outcomes. So we spoke about diverse egalitarianism. We also brought in the concept of achievements and freedom to achieve in the context of Sen's book. And then we moved on to James Heckman's ideas on investing in education, where he focused on the three main questions of when does inequality start with respect to education? Is it worthwhile to reduce inequality by investing in education, and how best to invest limited resources to create more productive human capital? So when we discussed about inequalities of outcomes and opportunities, we also discussed about inequalities in earnings as outcomes and processes or opportunities, where we discussed the dispersion of earnings by gender. We looked at returns to education, mean earnings and returns to education among full-time workers between the ages of 35 and 44. And then we saw how parents' earnings determine the earnings of their children. And then we came up with the conclusion that the persistence of earnings inequality across generations seems to have become more evident as data quality has improved. And we saw that there are very high estimated elasticities with regard to this, and it suggests that the opportunity for upward mobility in countries such as the United States is more limited than that was previously thought. So it highlighted the importance of policies aimed at increasing educational and economic opportunities for disadvantaged families. In week 7, we also discussed an important issue of equity in healthcare. And then we discussed on education inequalities in developing countries and India. And in week 8, we have focused on health policy, education policy, and the right to health and universal health care in the Indian context. We have tried to distinguish between these concepts of right to health and universal health care, and we have seen how the concept of universal health care has drawn a lot of its features from the conceptualization surrounding right to health. In week 9, we have discussed about disease burdens, and we have discussed two important reports, the annual status of education report and the public report on basic education, which are two important reports, citizen-centric reports that have come up in the context of education in India. We still have 4 more weeks to go in the course. And in this second live session, it was expected that you pose your questions based upon the content of the course. So we will wait to take a few questions. But otherwise, this was a roundup of what we have done in the last 4 weeks of this course. In the upcoming 4 weeks of the course, our focus will be on moving towards general issues or general lectures surrounding health and education. Beginning from week 9, we want to study. Currently, you are in the week 9 of the course, so we are studying about status of health and education. In week 10 of this course, we will be studying about databases, particularly focusing on Indian morbidity and mortality surveys and the Indian official statistics on school education and higher education. Then following this week, in week 11, we have discussed about health financing and education financing and what are the important things to keep in mind when discussing about health and education financing. And in the final week of this course, the week 12 of this course, we will be discussing about health workforce, how health workforce is an important component of healthcare expenditure. And we have tried to bring in the discussion surrounding how we understand health labor force or health workforce by taking cues from the theories around labor economics, particularly focusing on the wage determination model of labor demand and supply. And then slowly we have moved on to the international literature, particularly coming from the World Health Organization on the health labor market analysis conceptualization, and how, while discussing about health labor market, we necessarily have to speak about the education sector, the policies, and understand the systems approach that has been taken to understand that have been taken to center stage the discussion on human health workforce. Then in the second lesson of the last week, we discuss about education and labor market transitions. What are the expected transitions that need to take place after having attained different levels of education, and the demographic dividend that we talk about, and how that contributes to opportunities in the labor market in the labor markets of the country. So we will be discussing about whether or not those transitions are taking place, and if they have taken place, how they have taken place, and if they have not, what are the shortcomings, and what are the implications of adequate amount of transitions not taking place from higher education to labor market in the context of India. And in the final lesson of the final week, we have summarized and concluded all the lessons and all the modules we have taken as part of this course. We have highlighted the strong areas of this course and also the limitations of the course. And we have tried to wrap up the discussion surrounding health and education from a theory perspective, as well as what are the lessons that we can draw in the context of developing countries with specific reference to India. So since we do not have any questions on the live session now, with this roundup, I would like to end this interaction. And if the learners continue to have some questions about the course, please feel free to put them up on the portal, and we will be answering those questions there.